Somewhere on the Mississippi, a fishing boat sits on flat brown water that gives back almost nothing to the eye. A few feet down, the light stops. Whatever is moving beneath that boat right now is invisible from where anyone is standing, and most people who spend time on this river never once ask what that actually means. In 1937, in Alton, Illinois, that question got answered in the worst possible way for anyone's assumptions about inland rivers. Fishermen there encountered an animal that has no business being that far from an ocean. A bull shark caught in the Mississippi, roughly 2,800 river kilometers upstream from the Gulf of Mexico, in a stretch of water most people picture as nothing more dangerous than catfish and carp. The ocean is a continent away by road. By river, apparently, it is closer than anyone wants to believe. And here's the part that should actually unsettle you. That shark is not even the most extraordinary predator naturally living in this river system. Some of the animals that belong here permanently can outweigh it by a wide margin. If a story like that changes how you think about the river nearest you, drop the name of that river in the comments right now, because the rest of this only gets stranger. Before going further, it's worth naming the mental map most people are working from without realizing it. Ocean predators belong near coasts. River predators are supposed to be modest, familiar, a little muddy. Nothing that would make a headline. Swamp predators belong somewhere south, somewhere specific, somewhere you'd have to go looking for them. Ecosystems do not respect those categories the way our imagination does. The Mississippi is not a giant isolated bathtub sitting in the middle of the country. It is a connected corridor. Gulf-influenced water at one end, tributaries and floodplains, and thousands of river miles running the length of it, all linked together in ways most people standing on a single riverbank never have reason to picture. This investigation is going to test three specific things about that corridor: distance, how far a major predator can actually penetrate inland; size, how large an animal that belongs here permanently can become; and movement, whether these enormous fish are actually traveling through the system or simply sitting in one place, waiting to be mythologized. The United States Geological Survey now runs acoustic telemetry networks across large stretches of the Mississippi Basin for exactly this reason. Because movement between river reaches, tributaries, and barriers turns out to matter enormously for how these ecosystems actually function. And this is all where one of the most repeated shark stories connected to this river starts to fall apart. Go back to Alton for a moment, because the concrete details matter more than the headline. That capture sat roughly 2,800 river kilometers from the Gulf, deep enough into the interior that the animal had crossed almost the entire length of the connected river system to get there. The interesting question was never simply how a shark survives in fresh water. It's how one physically traveled that far. Bull sharks are euryhaline, which means they can tolerate dramatic swings in salinity that would be lethal to most other shark species, letting them move between saltwater brackish estuaries and true freshwater rivers with a flexibility almost nothing else in their family shares. Researchers who later examined the Alton case pointed to water temperature, not freshwater tolerance itself, as one of the real constraints on how far upriver a shark like that could realistically travel. They also noted something easy to miss, that the major lock system just downstream of that stretch was not yet fully operating at the time the shark was caught, meaning the river offered a kind of open passage upstream that mostly does not exist there today. That reframes the entire story. The river was not violating biology. The average person's mental map of the river was simply wrong. But there's a complication. For decades, a second Upper Mississippi shark occurrence from 1995 got repeated right alongside Alton, treated as confirmation that this kind of thing happened more than once. Investigators eventually went back through the evidence on that second case, and it did not hold up. That correction should feel at first like the story is shrinking. Researchers who re-examined the 1995 Upper Mississippi occurrence concluded the evidence surrounding it suggests it was probably a hoax, which leaves the verified historical record noticeably thinner than the version that gets passed around online. Picture the two cases side by side for a second. One pin on the map, Alton, backed by a specimen, a location, and a body of scientific literature discussing exactly how it got there. Another pin, 1995, upstream, repeated in article after article for years, that turns out to rest on evidence nobody could actually stand behind once someone went back and looked closely. And this is exactly where the story actually gets stronger instead of weaker. One extreme, carefully verified occurrence is more scientifically interesting than 20 unverifiable ones because it forces you to take the real mechanism seriously instead of hiding behind a pile of repeated folklore. The honest takeaway was never that bull sharks secretly infest inland America. It's that the physiology and the river's own connectivity make an extraordinary penetration like Alton possible, even while extreme excursions that far upriver appear to be exceptionally rare events, not a hidden pattern. Which raises the obvious next question. If the shark is mostly an occasional, remarkable visitor, what actually lives in this river permanently that could rival or beat it in size? Zoom out from the shark entirely for a moment, because the mechanism behind everything in this story is the river itself. A major river system is not simply a location where certain animals happen to live. It functions as a transport network, with the main channel connecting to tributaries, tributaries connecting to backwaters, backwaters opening onto the floodplain during high water, and the floodplain eventually draining back toward the Gulf. Modern telemetry work has made a version of this visible that simply wasn't available a generation ago. The USGS maintains acoustic receiver arrays across portions of the Mississippi and its tributaries, specifically to track fish passage, migration, and connectivity. And that research explicitly looks at how dams and locks alter both the upstream and downstream movement of fish and their access to habitat off to the sides of the main channel. A fish spotted once in one location is only a single snapshot. The actual organism occupies something closer to an entire riverscape, one that expands and contracts with water level, temperature, and discharge, and the animals living in it respond to those shifts constantly, whether or not anyone is there watching. One species in this system demonstrates that better than the shark ever could, because it has been living in waters like this for millions of years, and some individuals grow heavier than a grown man could lift off the ground on his own. Its head looks almost reptilian. Its scales sit on the body like armor plating instead of ordinary fish scales. And unlike the shark, it has never been a visitor here. This is the alligator gar, and it deserves to be introduced less like a monster and more like something closer to a living fossil, an ancient lineage with a genuinely native claim to this entire river system, one that was already patrolling these channels long before European settlers ever laid eyes on the Mississippi. It carries 2 rows of teeth along its upper jaw, built for grabbing and holding prey rather than slicing through it. And it has occupied Gulf-connected river systems since long before anyone was measuring them. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service identifies the alligator gar as one of the largest freshwater fish species in North America, reporting maximum lengths around 10 feet and potential weights approaching 350 pounds, with a native range that includes the Mississippi River drainage and Gulf coastal systems. That number alone is worth sitting with, because it means the largest native predator in this system can outweigh the shark that opened this entire story. And this isn't a theoretical ceiling pulled from a lab estimate. Mississippi wildlife authorities have documented a 327-pound alligator gar captured commercially at Lake Chotard in 2011, alongside a 215-pound rod and reel state record taken from the Mississippi River near Natchez. The bull shark built the thumbnail for this story. The alligator gar is what actually fulfills the title, and it's worth being precise here rather than sensational. Fish in the 200-plus pound range are not the average alligator gar you'd pull out of these waters on an ordinary afternoon. They are exceptional individuals, the extreme end of a population that mostly runs much smaller, which is exactly why a documented 327-pound specimen is treated as a landmark record rather than a routine catch. And this fish is not simply sitting motionless under one log for its entire life either. Research using telemetry on alligator gar has found real relationships between how far individual fish disperse and environmental variables like river discharge and water temperature, meaning at least a portion of these populations are genuinely mobile, shifting position through the system as conditions change, rather than staying locked to a single stretch of river indefinitely. So, if a predator in the 200 to 300-pound range naturally belongs in these waters, actively moving through a landscape this large, it's worth asking what else people are visually underestimating every single time they look at an ordinary stretch of brown river water. Now here's the part where drop the guard a little, because the shark got your attention and the GAR got your respect. But there's a third predator in this story that most people would never think to be afraid of, and that's exactly what makes it worth including: blue catfish. The word itself sounds almost deliberately unthreatening, and that's the entire point of putting it here. Mississippi wildlife officials state that blue catfish can exceed 5 feet in length and reach around 130 pounds. And in 2022, an angler named Eugene Cronley landed the state's official rod and reel record, a 131-pound blue catfish caught in the Mississippi River near Natchez, the same stretch of water tied to the GAR record. Consider the contrast for a second. A 5-foot shark makes headlines by default. A 5-foot, 100-pound class catfish sounds to most people like nothing more than an unusually lucky day at the boat ramp. But biologically, both of those animals are large-bodied predators exploiting the exact same kind of vast, connected aquatic space, and adult blue catfish feed on smaller fish, along with mollusks, crayfish, and other prey drawn from that same broad system. Some acoustic tracking work on blue catfish beyond the Mississippi itself has even characterized them as highly mobile, identifying distinct patterns of active movers, transitional individuals, and fish that stay closer to home, which tells you the mobility story running through this entire river isn't limited to sharks or gar. It's also worth being fair to what this species actually is, because it would be easy to oversell. Blue catfish are opportunistic feeders working through whatever the river happens to offer, not obligate hunters stalking prey the way a shark does. And most individuals never come anywhere close to the state record. The real lesson sitting underneath all three predators is that hidden scale in this ecosystem doesn't only come from rare, exotic visitors. It also comes from animals so familiar that people quietly stopped asking how large they can actually get. If you've personally hooked, seen, or heard about a fish out of an American river that felt far too big for the water it came from, put the river, the state, and roughly how big it was in the comments, because those details are exactly the kind of leads that point toward which river gets investigated in a future episode. Put all three of these animals back on the same map, and the real anomaly finally becomes obvious. The bull shark is an extreme, rare visitor, arriving from a completely different evolutionary world and surviving here only under unusual physiological and hydrological conditions. The alligator gar is a native megafish, ancient, armored, and built for exactly this kind of environment. The blue catfish is the most familiar of the three, and still capable of exceptional size most people never account for. Three different evolutionary histories, three different feeding strategies, three completely different relationships with freshwater itself, and one single system makes all three of them possible at once: the river. Standing beside the Mississippi, a person experiences surface width, current, and color, and almost nothing else. What that surface view leaves out is depth, submerged structure, timber lying on the bottom for decades, thousands of connected river miles branching outward in every direction, seasonal floodplain access opening and closing with the water level, temperature gradients running through the system, and animals moving through stretches of river far beyond whatever short section happens to be visible from the bank. None of that hidden dimension shows up in a photograph taken from a dock. It only shows up in years of survey data, telemetry pings, and the occasional record fish that forces biologists to update what they thought the ceiling was. That's why the question this whole story opened with actually changes meaning by the end. What's under you? At the start, that question meant, could there possibly be a shark down there? By now, it means something closer to, how much of this ecosystem have you simply never been positioned to see? The USGS telemetry infrastructure spread across this basin exists for exactly this reason, because individual fish move across spatial scales that are functionally impossible to infer from a single point on a single riverbank, no matter how long someone stands there watching. None of this is an argument that American rivers are secretly death traps. It's evidence that large river ecosystems operate at a scale that the view from the surface actively disguises from anyone who hasn't gone looking for the rest of it. So the honest answer to where this story lands, yes, American rivers can genuinely contain predators far larger and occasionally far stranger than most people walking along them ever assume. But the three examples here are not equivalent to each other, and treating them as identical would be its own kind of exaggeration. Bull sharks making extreme upriver excursions into places like the upper Mississippi appear to be extraordinarily rare, verified in one strong historical case, and specifically not in the second, more famous one people keep repeating. Alligator gar are native megafaunal predators that have belonged in this system since long before anyone was keeping records. Blue catfish are familiar, ordinary-sounding river residents, fully capable of exceptional documented size. The common thread running underneath all three was never really danger. It was connectivity, scale, and invisibility, three qualities that let a major river hide an enormous amount of biological space beneath a surface that tells an observer almost nothing about what is actually occupying it or moving through it at any given moment. None of this should read as an invitation to fear the water. It should read as a correction to how small most people assume these systems are, when the honest scale of them is closer to a continent than a creek. As telemetry keeps improving year over year, the honest, unresolved question is what kind of movement is happening in these rivers right now that nobody has had the tools to actually see until very recently. And if this is the kind of river investigation you want more of, quietly documented, evidence over hype, subscribe, because the Mississippi is only one system and there's a lot more hidden scale where that came from.